Liberal calculus professor tries to humiliate Elon Musk, has no idea he's a math genius. The university was one of the most prestigious in the country, a place where the brightest minds came to sharpen their skills. Students spent years preparing to get accepted, knowing that inside these walls, knowledge wasn't just taught, it was tested. And no one tested students harder than Dr. Richard Alden. Dr. Alden wasn't just a calculus professor, he was a force of nature. Known for his razor-sharp wit and brutal teaching style, he made sure every student knew their place. He wasn't afraid to humiliate those who struggled, believing that pressure created brilliance. His students respected him, feared him, and sometimes even despised him, but no one ever dared to challenge him. That's why, when he spotted a quiet man sitting in the middle row, he saw an opportunity. The man was older than the other students, dressed casually in jeans and a black t-shirt. He wasn't taking notes, wasn't struggling to keep up. He just sat there, watching, relaxed. That irritated Dr. Alden. No one in his class should be that comfortable. Smirking, he decided it was time to put this mystery student in his place. "You there," he said, his voice carrying across the lecture hall. "Yes, you, in the black t-shirt. Since you seem to have everything figured out, why don't you come up here and solve this?" A few students snickered. They had seen this play out before. The professor would call on an unsuspecting student, throw an impossible calculus problem at them, watch them squirm, and then step in to graciously correct their mistakes. It was all part of the routine, but today they had no idea who they were dealing with. The man, Elon Musk, looked up, completely unfazed. Without a word, he stood, pushed his chair back, and walked toward the chalkboard. Dr. Alden leaned against his desk, arms crossed, waiting for the usual signs of panic, a hesitant grip on the chalk, a nervous glance at the class. But Musk showed none of it. Instead, he studied the equation with quiet focus, and then, with a slight smirk, he picked up the chalk. The class expected hesitation. What they got instead was genius in motion. Dr. Alden smirked as he leaned back against his desk. The equation on the board wasn't just difficult, it was a trap, a carefully crafted calculus problem filled with hidden complexities designed to trip up anyone who wasn't truly an expert. It was the kind of problem that made even top students hesitate. Musk glanced at the board, his expression unreadable. The room was silent, every student waiting for the inevitable stammering, the professor's smug corrections, the lesson in intellectual humiliation. But Musk didn't hesitate. He picked up the chalk and, with effortless precision, began writing. At first, the students didn't react. They had seen many students attempt to solve problems before, some more confident than others. But within seconds, something was different. Musk wasn't just writing, he was solving. Quickly. Instead of taking the long, conventional approach, he used shortcuts and mathematical techniques most of the students didn't even recognize. He simplified complex functions in seconds, avoiding unnecessary steps like someone who had already mapped out the entire solution in his mind before touching the chalk. A murmur rippled through the class. Students leaned in, their eyes widening as they tried to follow along. Dr. Alden's smirk faltered. Musk kept going, effortlessly gliding through the toughest parts of the problem as if it were elementary math. He wasn't just answering, he was teaching, breaking down each step so smoothly that even those who struggled with calculus could understand. A student near the front nudged his friend. "Dude, what is happening?" The professor, trying to mask his unease, took a step forward. "Interesting approach," he muttered, trying to sound unimpressed. "But let's see if you actually—" Before he could finish, Musk placed the chalk down and stepped back. The final answer stood there, perfectly boxed at the bottom of the board. No extra work, no hesitation, just a flawless solution. For the first time in years, Dr. Alden didn't know what to say. He quickly scanned the board, searching for errors, any misstep that he could use to regain control of the room. There were none. The problem, his own trick problem, had been solved perfectly. The silence in the room was deafening. Then finally, a student whispered what everyone else was thinking. "Who is this guy?" Musk smiled, slipping his hands into his pockets. He could have explained right then. He could have told them exactly who he was, but instead he just waited. Because the real shock, it hadn't even begun yet. Dr. Alden stared at the board, his fingers twitching at his sides. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. He had expected hesitation, confusion, maybe even a failed attempt. Instead, the problem had been solved with unbelievable efficiency. He forced a chuckle, shaking his head. "Not bad," he said, trying to mask his unease. "But let's see if you can handle something more advanced." The students exchanged glances. The professor's usual smugness had been replaced by something else, determination. He wasn't going to let this stand. Grabbing the chalk himself, Doctor, Alden quickly erased the board and replaced the problem with something far more complex. This time, it wasn't just a calculus equation. It was a multi-layered function involving implicit differentiation, infinite series, and a non-trivial integral. The students winced just looking at it. The professor stepped back with his arms crossed. "If you're as good as you think you are, you should be able to handle this." Musk tilted his head slightly, examining the equation. Then, just as before, he picked up the chalk and began. But this time, he spoke as he worked. "Most people would attack this problem using standard differentiation rules," he said casually, his hand moving fluidly across the board. "But that takes too long. Instead, you can apply Euler's identity to simplify the expression first, which immediately eliminates most of the unnecessary steps." A student in the front row gasped. "Wait! What?" Musk continued, unfazed. "Now, if you set the limit properly before integrating, you avoid running into indeterminate forms," he explained, effortlessly bypassing a common mistake that would have trapped even the brightest students. The chalk glided across the board, each step executed with precision. He wasn't just solving the problem, he was rewriting the way it was approached. By the time he finished, the final answer stood there, neatly boxed. Silence. A few students exchanged stunned looks. One, who had been frantically writing down every step, whispered, "I don't even think that method is in our textbook." The professor's smirk had completely vanished. He wanted to challenge Musk again, but he couldn't, because this wasn't just intelligence. This was brilliance in motion. Dr. Alden forced a cough, trying to regain his authority. "Where exactly did you say you studied?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. Musk smiled slightly, but he didn't answer, because in just a few seconds, the entire class was about to realize the truth. Dr. Alden's face was unreadable, but his clenched jaw told the real story. He had never been challenged like this, not in his classroom, not by a supposed student who had just outperformed him twice. He wasn't about to let it happen again. "All right," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Let's really put your skills to the test." With swift, aggressive strokes, he scrawled a new problem across the board. This time, it wasn't just difficult, it was designed to be impossible without an advanced understanding of mathematical theory. A nonlinear differential equation, a hidden trick with improper integrals, and a complex limit that led to nowhere unless you knew exactly what you were doing. The students exchanged nervous glances. Even the best among them wouldn't dare attempt something like this without weeks of preparation. Dr. Alden capped the marker and crossed his arms. "Solve this." Musk studied the board for a moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he laughed. Not mockingly, not arrogantly, just a quiet, amused chuckle, as if he had just seen an old riddle from his childhood. The professor's smirk returned. "Something funny?" Musk shook his head, still smiling. "You tried to set a trap," he said, rolling the chalk between his fingers. But this equation collapses if you approach it from first principles. Alden's smirk faded again. Musk turned back to the board and without hesitation began solving. He didn't follow the professor's expected route. Instead of brute force calculations, he restructured the equation itself. See, most people would attempt separation of variables here, Musk explained as he worked, but that's inefficient. Instead, if you transform it into a Laplace domain and analyze its asymptotic behavior, the answer practically falls out. The students leaned in, watching as Musk's method cut the problem in half in mere seconds. A hushed whisper spread through the room. "Dude, this isn't in our textbooks." Dr. Alden, arms still crossed, suddenly felt a bead of sweat on his temple. Musk finished the last line, boxed the answer and stepped back. "That should do it." Silence. Then, from the back of the room, clap. A single student started clapping. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire class erupted into thunderous applause, because at that moment they all realized the truth. Dr. Alden hadn't been testing Elon Musk. Elon Musk had been testing him. Dr. Alden stood frozen, his arms still crossed, but his confidence had vanished. He had spent years controlling this classroom, dominating every intellectual battle, ensuring he was the smartest person in the room. But today, that illusion had shattered. The applause faded as a student in the back gasped, staring at his phone. "Wait, no way." His friend leaned in. "What?" The student turned his screen around, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's Elon Musk." The name hit the room like an earthquake. A ripple of realization spread through the students. Heads turned, eyes widened. The hum of whispered conversations grew louder. Another student quickly typed into Google, pulling up a picture. "It is him," she said, her voice shaking. "Elon Musk is in our class." One by one, the students connected the dots. The effortless way he solved problems, the deep understanding of calculus, the unconventional methods. Musk had never been just another student. He was one of the greatest minds of this generation. Dr. Alden blinked, his throat suddenly dry. His usual sharp comebacks failed him. For the first time in his career, he had nothing to say. The student who first recognized Musk hesitated before speaking. "Professor, did you just try to embarrass the CEO of SpaceX, Tesla, and Neuralink with a calculus problem?" A wave of suppressed laughter rippled through the room. Musk, still standing at the board, slipped his hands into his pockets and smirked. "Well," he said casually, "it was a fun challenge." The professor swallowed hard. You should have said something," he stammered. Musk raised an eyebrow. "Why? You never asked." Alden's face burned. His entire strategy had just collapsed. He had spent the entire class trying to humiliate a man who had designed the math behind reusable rockets and artificial intelligence. Another student muttered under his breath, "Damn! This is the best lecture ever." Musk turned back to the class. "So," he said with a grin, "who's really teaching today?" And just like that, the balance of power had shifted forever. Dr. Alden inhaled sharply, trying to maintain what little composure he had left. His entire classroom was still buzzing, students whispering excitedly, phones lighting up as they shared what had just happened. This was supposed to be his stage, his moment to prove dominance. But instead, he had unknowingly gone head-to-head with one of the greatest minds of the modern era, and lost. He cleared his throat, forcing a small, stiff smile. "Well," he said, voice uneven, "that was an impressive demonstration." Musk nodded. "Math is fun when you see it as a tool instead of a challenge." His tone wasn't mocking. If anything, it was encouraging. He wasn't here to humiliate anyone. He just loved solving problems. One of the students near the front raised a hand. "Mr. Musk," she asked eagerly, "what's your best advice for people who want to think like you?" Musk turned to face the class. "Learn to think in first principles instead of just memorizing formulas," he said. "Break problems down to their fundamental truths and then reason your way up from there. That's how you innovate, by questioning everything." The room was completely silent. Even Dr. Alden had to admit he had just learned something too. As the energy in the room settled, one thing was clear. This wasn't just another lecture. It was a moment the students would never forget. They hadn't just witnessed a math problem being solved. They had witnessed greatness in action. Dr. Alden, still standing at the front, exhaled slowly. For years, he had believed intelligence was about control, about proving you were the smartest person in the room. But today, he had seen something different. Musk hadn't been arrogant, hadn't mocked him. He had simply demonstrated, with ease, with clarity, with confidence. And that, Alden realized, was what true intelligence looked like. Musk set the chalk down, turned to the class and gave a final nod. "At the end of the day," he said, "it's not about knowing all the answers, it's about knowing how to find them." The students erupted into applause, some standing, others still in disbelief. As Musk walked toward the exit, one student whispered, "I think we just witnessed history." And with that, Elon Musk disappeared through the door, leaving behind a lesson far greater than calculus. Because true genius isn't about showing off, it's about pushing the world forward.